maybe we should.
All right. Hi, everybody. This is the Nefia SIG Automation meeting for Tuesday, February 21st. Wim, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, so the one thing that I wanted to, or that I had in mind to discuss is that we did the poll, right, to the people on contributions or who is willing to contribute in general. I'm not sure whether people are willing to, I'm not sure whether we can show the individual or the
Probably
individual.
better if we don't, but if you can show a summary or just describe it.
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen, and so this is data from yesterday, I saw that there was more input coming, but we have in total around 8 full-time equivalents. So that means that, so if you look to the data, so I just take the percentage of the people and then do a calculation. I also do a calculation on how many people, people basically gave their expertise and they gave their percentage of time. So if I add up all the percentages of time, you get, let's say, a view on the amount of people that are willing to, or how much amount of work that we have for people to contribute. So if you do the math, you get around, yesterday it was around 8 full-time equivalents. So that means 8 people that would work on it full-time, which is, I think, quite substantial, which is good. Now, now in that category, we have both, we have experts, beginner, and medium level, right? So one of the thoughts that I have, okay, we have the work that you have in the GitHub issues, right? So one option is that we basically divide and conquer and say, okay, please volunteer yourself for a given task. On the other hand, I have the feeling that not everybody's up to speed on everything, right? Mm-hmm. So one idea that I personally had, and I don't know, I just wanted to discuss is if we would, so I see we kind of have, and maybe I'm simplistic and maybe people have other views. I see kind of there is 3 levels or 3 areas in which we have to do work. If you look to the least one scope, so one is what I call you come from the high level intent, you have to do this fan out and da. So that's what I call everything up to the fan out element, right? Is one area. The second area is what I call the hydration space, right? So there is a bunch of stuff in the hydration, like the IPAM, the NF injector, and so on and so forth. And then the third is basically at the workload, is basically take what was the result of what happened at the hydration, and then actuate, like you have to basically take the SMF deployment, UPF deployment, AMF deployment, and then get an AMF spun up and an SMF spun up and what have you, right? So I'm just, simplistically, and maybe other people have different views, is you have these 3 areas of work, basically. And okay, one idea that I had, maybe we should form some, let's say, sub-teams on each of those topics and maybe try to say, okay, I get a lead. So you have all of a sudden you have a lead for that specific thing. So we could basically say, okay, that's the person who is the domain lead for that area. And all of a sudden we can then bring in some expertise to explain it. So, and that team is going to make sure that part of the work is getting done, and they report on the time, what it takes, how they are doing, and what have you. Mm-hmm. It's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's the right approach. We'll figure out the exact breakdown, but that sounds like a reasonable starting point to me. I think that we'll also have, and I don't know, we sent it out to SIG Automation. There's SIG Release 2, and we have probably people who are, some of those people might be split across those 2 groups. Sure. And there's inefficiencies. I mean, 8 people sounds amazing.
It's a lot.
A lot of inefficiencies in people giving partial time.
For sure.
So like I'm sure, and then SIG release stuff. So it's gonna be effectively less, but still that's amazing. And I think that Yeah, that sounds like the right approach. We need to divide this in to, you know, parts that we need to expand the ability for people to sort of execute independently. Yeah, Vish.
Because it allows us to scale out, in my view, as well. Yeah. So because we are too hierarchical at the moment, but let other people get their views. Yeah, sorry, Fish. Yeah.
Oh, just curious. You said 8 equivalent full people, right? It is spread across how many people actually? Just curious.
26 from yesterday, I think. 26.
Okay, the 26. Okay, it's consolidated into 8 people. Good to know. Just was because having the diversity is important too. So was curious. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so 26 people. Yeah, so it's a fair bit of people to manage and communication and ramp up and Anne.
Hi, the 3 areas that Vim just described, for my sequence diagram for SMF, I started focusing on the bring up of the SMF, so on the workload. So the third area for now, until we further agree, discuss, and approach for intent and fan out. Is that kosher? Is that acceptable?
Well, let's sorry, I need paper to take notes. So the areas so there's different parts of the process, right? So there's different ways to slice it up.
Yeah.
One is by kind of network function or you know, like the SMF, the AMF, the UPF. Now they're all going to go through the same set of sequence of processes. So you know, do we divide it up by what content is moving through that pipeline, or do we divide it up by sections of the pipeline, or some combination thereof? I mean, I think if we give them names, so Wim, when you say, I'm sorry, I know there's hands, but let's try to iterate a little bit on what Wim said. The first part, so there's the sort of design of the CRDs, which informs the sort of what you call pre-fan out or sort of
I called it all the way everything up to to fan out, basically, because the idea is to use package variant for fan out. So basically you have to do some work till that point, basically, and then that's what
right. And one of the things, so there's a few different, and maybe we'll get into this in a second. Like Aravind and I were talking the other day, and he was going through the process, and I think I mentioned this in some of the issues, and we've sort of skirted around it here, but I haven't fully articulated maybe my thoughts to you. And like the NF injector, the injection that we do of invariant information. So information, basically we took in the workshop, we specified cluster invariant information and cluster targeting in the 5G core topology. We stored some cluster data in the workload cluster. We did fan out.
Yeah.
And then we had this NF injector control that sort of went back, pulled information that was invariant and injected in each individual one.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually might be able to do that on the other side of fan out, the invariant piece. So there might be things moving around, and it kind of makes a little more sensible flow. But we couldn't do it with the primitives we had before. So we're trying to find the primitives. So there's going to be work on the primitives. So package variant doesn't do injection right now, for example. So we need to add that. So I would say, there's the design of the CRDs. We'll just call it the topology piece.
Topology from input to fan out. I don't know what is a good wording for it. But
we'll sort that out.
Yeah, we'll find out.
I'm just trying to put it in my mind, and hopefully, and then there's the fan out piece, and then there's the hydration. Well, see, hydration can happen across the whole thing. That's why maybe we call it the cluster specific hydration.
Yeah, correct. It's per cluster that it happens. Yeah, correct. So, yeah.
And then there's the actuation side.
Yeah.
There's also potentially a sort of a feedback loop side.
Yes, okay, I even forgot that. So yeah, it is a good point. Yeah. That's
Okay, that's okay. Well, okay. So let somebody else talk. I don't know who. And two,
I
you've
have
got
a
your hand up,
follow-up
Leslie.
question.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason I tackle the actuation side is because I started with SMF back in November
Yeah.
and had a conversation with Stephen last week. And also the fact that we're still arguing or debating, the CRD design and the fan out. And I don't want to start sequence diagramming that until we get to a common place. Does that make sense? Am I doing the right
Yeah.
approach?
Makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think part of how we get to the common approach is by diagramming it and arguing, discussing. So like you mentioned Aravind and Tal and a few of us, like, because Aravind, remember, Aravind was going to try and take the diagrams and kind of make another version of them to present, and he's going through it, and he had like 6 different ways, ideas about how right it could be done. And so we had discussions about it before we came, and I don't know if he's prepared to talk about it yet today here, but like that's going to be part of how we do that, right? Is and obviously we want to do that amongst all of us as much as possible, but it's like 6 hours of meetings, which I'm sure not everybody's interested in. And anyway, it's just part of the sausage. How the sausage is made is that everybody tries to figure out what they think the right way to do it is, and then we all talk together. So in any case, yeah, agreed to some extent. There's a let's figure out what we're doing and then diagram it, but there's also a diagramming is how we figure it out. But I think that we should think about this idea of, do we slice things at all by content area? For example, I know Arna is interested in cluster provisioning, which isn't necessarily within scope. If they can deliver it and that's what they're interested in working on, I'll take it, right? So
what I was trying to say is that we have now a list of people, right? So how do we use this these people? And I don't know whether it's a good idea or not. I was just thinking by myself, okay, we now have a list of people, which is great. Thanks everybody for the response. The question is, how do we go about it? But let's maybe have some other views. And I'm not saying
one last question.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, and I'll yield the floor. When I look at the diagram that Stephen had and then Vim had, the 2 set of diagrams, there seemed to be not mentioning or implicit assumption about interaction with different repos, right? Like the package invariant controller, my understanding is there's a package repo behind it, and possibly the same repo that store the NF topology, or maybe separate. So, one level down, double clicking, I need more details. I need more.
Sorry, I don't mean it.
Go ahead. That's it. I need more.
There's actually there's this is exactly the problem Aravind was having, like there's so many different views or cross-sectional ways you can slice it. But package, one of the things you can think about is when we talk about package, there's a resource called package revision, which is like a draft, that's like a draft package or a package that's been tagged as a particular version. Those are all package revisions or revisions of a specific named package. Those all correspond directly to Git resources, things committed in Git and tagged. And so that's a sort of just mental model wise a shadow. So package variant is one step above that, and it controls the cloning of one of those from one repo and the mutation of it, and then the delivery to a different repo, or the same, but typically different repo. And so there's 2 repos potentially involved in that one resource. So we probably need to draw that somehow, but it can't be on the same drawing probably as a Stephen or Wim type drawing because it's too much data.
Yeah, it's a one level down, double clicking when you start focusing on the package invariant controller.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm approaching it. I just want to take a pulse check if it's the
Makes
right
sense.
road.
Yeah,
And,
makes sense.
maybe before Ganesh goes, one thing is I think we have to prepare for the divide and conquer, but I think there's a few prerequisites, as Anne was alluding to, that we have to figure out before we can do so, right? Because at least we have to understand how the relationship are between these various entities. So I think we probably need the next 2 weeks to figure that out. But from the moment we have that, I think then we can probably, the idea is to split up and try to have various teams work together. But that was, I don't think we are ready yet to do so at this stage.
Yeah, I think we need a really good whiteboarding session or a few of them.
I agree.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Ganesh, you go in a second about one thing that this is kind of a detail, but it's come up from multiple questions from multiple people I've heard. We talk about repos today in R1. The relationship is you have a repo where you're storing kind of like packages before they've been customized to the cluster. And then for each workload cluster, you have individual repos. That one-to-one relationship between a workload cluster and a repo is an assumption of R1, not a requirement of Nefio. And there will be cases like people talk about RAN, where maybe there's not per cluster variance, but there's per 1,000 cluster variance or something, right? And maybe we can put it all in one, or we can delegate all that to the workload. There's going to be way more than that. So I don't want people to think, oh, this is how it works, and we're limited to this, because people are like, but I can't do this, I can't do that. And it's really, we're trying to constrain the design choices in R1 to make our lives, to make it so it can deliver something. Ganesh.
Hey, thank you, John, and thank you, Wim. Bringing the conversation to our previous topic, I thank you for sharing the total number and I think the total count that we have. So I would like to add 2 comments in this regard. The first is the possibility. I think I agree to the fact that it will be good to have 3 group segregation and work together. So I want to check the possibility of having time zone considered for each of these groups.
Agree.
The reason
the
reason I bring that is a healthy number of people are some of my colleagues who have entered. So a time zone consideration, for this group formation would help us work around the clock. So this is my first comment. And the second is, I think one of the agenda for the today meeting that you have mentioned is to figure out what we could do, how we could move ahead with this healthy number of people willing to contribute. So with that in mind, what is your thought on starting some work that we can work on this week itself? It could be something like unit testing, or I know there are some Jira issues that you have requested to take it up. But in addition to that, just to keep it active and just to keep it engaged, what are your thoughts on using some of the existing repos that are already available to start some unit testing so that people get hands-on the code? So moving forward, instead of just waiting for things to happen, let's just use the existing repo to make some work done. So these are my 2 points I would like to add.
So if I can summarize, make sure we fully get you. The first, split it into groups, and in those groups take time zone into consideration. I think that's a great idea. I think the challenge will be understanding if there's natural interest in certain areas. Like I mentioned, like certain organizations have an interest in certain areas. And so maybe those will fall across time zones, they won't, but I think that's a really smart thing to try and make that as much as possible. And your other point is, can people get started now on something? So I think that maybe what we should do is, unit tests would be awesome. I think there's certain areas where there's like primitives that need to be built out or understood at least. So if you sort of start at the bottom of the stack of Kubernetes, Multis, those things, if you're in one particular area, some of those might be necessary to have deep understanding of. And then you go up the stack to the porch pieces and the repos and the configuration management side of things. Like there's a lot of information to learn there, and that's also a little bit of a moving target that we're building in part to support the requirements of this project. And then there's of course the details of how we're using those primitives within. So maybe we can figure out a way to help people build up the knowledge in different layers, in addition to the unit type of things. Oh, and then release. So that begs the question of like the SIG release type of work, and whether those 26 people are also spread across SIG release, which I suspect they are, given that we're a lot of the same people in both communities. So I don't know if Stephen has some thoughts on that, or Tina, but maybe we go in order of hands. Does that make sense? Did I catch the different things? I'm trying to capture it.
I think the question is, where can people start? Is actually we probably need to see where that would make sense the most, right? So, but it's a very good point. Yeah.
And just to add on, where can people start, and how can they start some contribution, keep them engaged with our community? It can either be like for each of these group, write some pointers on where we can start. For example, John mentioned topics like multis and CRDs. So for each of these three groups, at least let's have some pointers that we would start learning in deep, as a preparation phase. So if it's not possible to start on some unit test coding or as such, like at least we can start on some topics. So this information would be really useful to get started.
I could use
really good idea too. Just one point, Fim. It would be really good idea for anybody who is to go through the workshop GitHub repo, because it talks a lot about the relevant technologies and also the design. I think I'm gonna ask that question. My terms comes with John. One question here, but more or less getting familiar with our workshop, the technologies involved, and it has all the links for different various aspects that John mentioned. So I think John also has done a great job writing up the brief in the GitHub about the overall architecture, overall philosophy of the project there. I think for anybody new, that would be a great starting point, and I would highly advise everybody to go through that.
Yeah, and I did put, thank you, Bala. I did put, there's I'll put it in the agenda, but there's a Nefio docs repository, and the README on that has links to a bunch of things. But the workshop is an awesome place to start because it's sort of our starting point, plus the seed code that's coming. The thing that to be aware of just is that nothing there is written in stone, right? This is a highly dynamic environment. So like we did package deployment controller there. We're proposing for R1, we use a slightly different set of primitives that are a little bit decomposed and generalized from that, because that was tied very closely to say like the specific Nefio cluster resource, and there's other issues with it. And so like it will evolve from there, but the concepts will stay the same. And once you understand that, then you can be, oh, that's what you're doing. You're taking this piece of that and that piece of that, splitting it apart, to be able to do D2 better or whatever it is. So thank you, Bala. That's yes, that would be definitely a great place to start if you haven't already gone through that. And I'll put the link in here, the docs link. Bala, did your hand was up for a while. Was that what you wanted to say?
I had a question too. And the one more point I wanted to mention is, John, your glossary section under the GitHub repo is also very good. That will give an idea of the terminologies that we use that you started probably. That's also.
Oh yeah, yeah, good. Thank you.
Yeah, that one. So my question was maybe slightly unrelated, but are we in the workshop? What we did was, obviously we had the 5GC operator that is responsible for creating the manifest on the edge cluster directly, rather than taking a shift left approach for the components. Are we going to do the same thing for all the three network functions in the R1, or are we going to take any different approach?
I mean, I think that's open for discussion. I think that UPF likely is going to be done that way I think the workshop, we had a lot of things we wanted to demonstrate, and a lot of what we're trying to do is, and similar with R1, frankly, we're trying to somewhat show, here are the tools and techniques Nafio is building to solve these problems. And so we're not necessarily saying in the workshop or in R1, here are the tools and techniques you should use for the specific problems we're solving, and they should be done in this specific way. We're trying to demonstrate capabilities and primitives, build and demonstrate capabilities and primitives. And then over time, we'll evolve as a community. Okay, we've got all these tools in our belt, which is the right one to use in the right circumstance, and it's going to vary among customers. So my point with saying that is I want to do the same in R1. I want to demonstrate techniques and build capabilities, but it's still at that point a bit of an R1 and probably R2 and maybe even R3, more of a toolbox than a solution. Eventually we'll get to a solution, but you got to know what tools you have first. So I think we should build something that has, at least for one thing, we need something that does a lot on the workload cluster. And but it's a lot of work to build those operators. So we'll have to see whether we need them in other cases and whether we can get away with not building them.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Thanks. Yeah, the other thing is probably to your point that how many of this is it time for us to take a second poll of like how many of this the 26 respondents, right, want to do something like more like testing or DevOpsy kind of thing, CI/CD, test automation, release activities versus coding and when I say coding, I mean coding, you know, the spirit of where my question is. So coding and unit testing type of thing is one thing, integration test, building test suites, test bed is a second activity, and the release activity, DevOps stuff, is a third activity in release management. So probably is it time for us to take a second poll to figure out where exactly people are interested?
But Bala, my idea was the idea was the following, right? If we can, and I don't know whether it's a good idea, by the way, but if we split into these areas, right, I think that team will become responsible for the whole life cycle of that area, right? So including the unit testing, the whole life cycle. So in other words, it basically that team becomes does the whole cycle. So we need to have enough people that we have to have a mix that basically can do the coding, the unit testing, but up to the integration testing side of things. I'm not saying this is the right approach. I'm just saying that that's one idea I threw into the mix.
Yeah, unit testing is definitely part of a development. I would say it's part of developer. Otherwise, there'll be no PRs, right?
Yeah.
But whereas the other activities are slightly different, and we have two separate SIGs as well. Are we going to blur the division? That's where the question is. There's from a responsibility perspective, like SIG automation, obviously design, unit testing, coding there is no question. It's a part of a developer's job. But from a SIG release perspective, integration testing, test bed development, release activities, CI/CD pipelines. So that's how the responsibility is right now. Are we gonna keep it? Are we gonna keep it that way?
But so Bala, maybe what we can do, or I say that SIG release is a domain by itself, right? And I think it's a good idea to have independent people to do it end to end and stuff like that. So maybe we say, okay, there is a team for SIG release, which is going to focus on the end to end integration as a separate group. So I was just making it from the architecture, but we could basically say, okay, SIG release is a dedicated domain, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the question is we only sent the survey. I guess maybe just raise like we have, how many people do we have here today? We have a decent number, 20 people. Like, you know, I don't know. I wonder how much overlap there is. And then so like if somebody can give 20% of their time, you know, they can't give it all to SIG release. So we have to, or SIG automation. So we have to figure, yeah, the capacity question around. I think we should probably assume that includes people contributing to SIG release, just because I think it's Like, Stephen, what do you think on that? Like, it's likely highly overlap, right? Or are you seeing people in your SIG release meetings that are not here or generally coming to this? I haven't unfortunately made the last couple of SIG release meetings because I have other things. Maybe he can't talk right now. It's like, I think it's school drop off time. and stuff.
Yeah, generally, if I may say so, if Stephen cannot, like, in my opinion, it's a lot of overlap, John.
Okay.
In terms of
So let's assume that's our capacity for across both SIGs. Is a safer assumption than that then there's some magical group of people out there that are going to do a bunch more work for us. And so, yeah, we should then make that SIG release a whole separate like focus area, like
Yeah.
what you're saying, yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah.
Tal, or I don't know who's next because and your
I think
hand.
I'll-
I have a
I'll-
couple questions, new ones. First, back to what Ganesh was saying, I was thinking there's a set of basic skills or knowledge or whatever you want to call it that each of us should have before we tackle Nephew, right? Like an understanding of Kubernetes, Go programming, some understanding of telco, and translating those 3 points into like some level of efficiency. And then on top of that is the demo, the POC in November. I forgot what you call it, the workshop,
Yeah.
right? So maybe we should document those steps so that somebody brand new to this or less experienced at this can say, okay, checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. Now I'm ready to tackle XYZ. It's
So what-
like a new hire
Yeah,
list of
onboarding.
things.
Yeah, what's the onboarding process?
Onboarding, yeah.
But
thank you.
my idea was to do that within that team, right? So if we have that
Yeah.
virtual group, is to do it within that, because if we spend the whole work or the meetings at the moment doing so, I think
No.
I
I
don't
would
know.
not recommend doing that now.
Yeah, no. So my idea was within the team is I form these teams. And then
I think Wim, what she's saying is that if we can just write it down, then
sure.
as we're figuring out the teams and getting each team ramped up, people can be doing this independently.
100%, yeah, 100%, yeah.
And the second question I want to bring up is what Tal said, right? It's all engineering effort, tasks, activities. And for me, speaking for myself, I want to focus on the design and implementation. And then I see testing as part of it, part of my responsibility. But I will, and helping out in release, but I'm not going to go set up CI/CD pipelines and servers. That I defer to the SIG release. So it's overlapping, but there'll be strong
maybe,
focus.
yeah. And just maybe to respond, because maybe my answer was not correct, and I do agree with what you said, is the team should be responsible. It's like you do typical development, right? You do development and unit testing, right? And that's basically your focus. And then there's another group who does integration and CI setup and stuff like that. And we maybe have to define these boundaries as such, right? And then, but that's what I'm also trying to say is that within that team, it could be that some person says, okay, I'm only interested in unit testing, and then he focus only on unit testing. So we have to build teams that have sufficient competence to be able to deliver that thing. And of course, there will be separate skills, and maybe some people do it all, some people do less, and yeah. So we have to find the right balance and mix.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we all have to be flexible because this is open source. This is not, a company project work where you get assigned things. You have to be more fluid in terms of picking up the slack if needed.
For sure.
Yeah, it's all volunteers. People will work on what they want to work. We're not taskmasters that can assign, work to people that they're not interested in, or
encourage people to sign up for things.
Yeah.
Strongly encourage.
On that note, if I can say two things. One is that the little mini groups that we're going to create, these task forces, maybe we should call them that, are we have quite a lot of people, so we need to avoid a very well-known problem of too many cooks, right? If there's a lot of interest in one thing, sometimes it just doesn't help to pour more engineers at the problem, right? Because just the coordination overhead is a lot. People mentioned the time zone challenges we have, et cetera. So I think we should all be aware of that, right? If there's something that a lot of people are passionate about, but there's already 6 people working on it, that's probably too much. On that note, I want to jump ahead already and start suggesting some task forces. Some of them were hinted at. I know a lot of you know that for a long time, I've been trying to push for us to do more work on the workload clusters. I wonder if it's a time to finally bring up a small, limited version of Multis management on the workload cluster for R1. We're obviously not going to be able to boil the ocean and do something very big, but so many of us have worked on this problem for a long time that I think if we put our heads together with some sort of MVP design for R1 that could just showcase some ability, we can do it. So I'm volunteering to work on that, in addition to other things, because I'm spending almost my entire workday on Nephio, so I'll be able to do more than one thing. But if anybody is interested in that, I know Demetrios is, I think Alok as well, others, contact me. Maybe we'll try to organize a task force to do something.
Yes, Tal, I'm fully on board with that, and so please contact me.
So,
Is this
Hey,
captured as a R1 task already? So that we can.
let's pause a second. I think that's a
Oh,
great idea,
sorry.
Tal. What I want to ask the question of is that, although that's a large scope, is that sufficient scope? Like we can't have 12 task force. So would it more be a group that owns the workload cluster and what happens on the workload cluster? So that would include what you're talking about. It would include, if we need to have some operator that manages kernel configuration, or if we need to have an operator that, or even I don't know. I'm asking, like, what about the function specific operators that run on the workload cluster?
So yeah, I mean, you're talking maybe about a more organization of Nephio generally. I'm really thinking just in the scope of R1. I don't know if these task forces will be permanent post R1. I think it's just for organizing the work right now. We might not need these task forces in the future, but just in terms of getting the next 2 months ahead in organization and work. So I'm not thinking about scope and responsibility more generally, just really a specific task.
Hey, Tal, can you really quickly in 1 or 2 sentences elaborate what you mean by Multis on the workload? I think I know what you mean, but I want a verification.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people would call it shift right, but the idea is that in the kept packages, we will store some CR that's that's a higher level of Multis network attachment definitions, and some provider controller on the workload cluster would actually generate those network attachment definitions for the
Okay.
yeah. So we had a few demos of it, if you remember the E&O demo.
Workload cluster network management or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
NAD creation. NAD creation. That's the most limited version of the task. Yeah.
And possibly driven by operator or cap function.
Yeah, the thing what we have to do is, because there will be a relationship towards the management cluster, because you will need some information to be able to do so. So the thing is, we have to figure. So it's not, you cannot contain it, in my view, just to the workload cluster, because you will need some information to be able to do the job. And
that's exactly where I was going.
That's the problem that I see, I personally, is that we can do those type of things, but they need to be thought through as a whole. You cannot do it independently, in my view.
Sure, but this is the point, that we'll have some sort of task force that can sit together, try to design it, and see if everybody agrees with the design. A very limited scope design for R1, right? To show just, as I said before, even if we do things for R1 that are just placeholders, right? Even if we're not putting a lot of meat into this component, but just showing that it's there, people who go to R1 and look at the release will say, okay, this is part of Nephio.
Yeah, but I think we had a discussion before, right? So I think my personal view is let's first deliver a scope that works end to end, and let's use all our people to do that. If we have people that can do more than that, let's do so. I'm not against that, but at least try to work and use our resources that we have to find our common goal, and then we can do more. If we start now already peeling off people that go on something that was not immediately how we defined release one, then we're probably going to create a problem for ourselves. So I would recommend that we first start, okay, let's divide and conquer of what we decided on initially, right? And we all
but again, you know, the too many cooks problem. Are you going to have 8 people working on fan out? It's going to be the same area of code.
At the moment, Tal, we don't even know the split. Okay, so
right.
as a result, it's all speculation. So let's first do the split and see how many people we have where, and then we can make that decision. But I think at this moment we are all speculating.
Sure, I'm making a proposal as well. It's just a proposal.
Yeah, well, so I think that's, I mean, like this is again gets back to that we can't. On the one hand, we can't be taskmasters because we're all different organizations and we all have our own interests and reasons for being involved. On the other hand, we do also have a common goal of making it all succeed. So I suggest what we do is we can maybe take a little time, and maybe we can talk about it again tomorrow, but like we can, in the agenda doc, I put a bullet proposed areas, and I put workload cluster network management as one. I think we put just people can propose there. And then tomorrow we can look at that. We can think about it more. We can try to structure it based on the architecture. It's going to be approximation at this point, but maybe we can start to iterate on it, and we can say, oh, these 5 of the 7 areas that were proposed are absolutely critical. And I know people are interested in these other 2, but can you help out on these through delivery, right? Like we can try to appeal to people's interest in the common goal to potentially set their own interests aside momentarily. So like, I think that's what I suggest is our approach to kind of collaboratively come up with something that's going to solve the primary use case.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I wanted to add is when we do anything, so keep in mind that it's not just implementation. Obviously, release activities involved, including the test bed creation, integration, documentation. So when we decide on the scope, we need to decide on the end-to-end. We need to consider the end-to-end workload.
Right. This gets back to we tried with the document to break into components with kind of this similar idea of like somebody's going to own a component, right? That's too granular. We probably need somewhere on the order of maximum 6 categories, maximum 6. So I guess we're iterating on that understanding of how to do that. And so obviously release, like docs, release. I don't know that I'm just.
The test bed too, right? Anything
test bed.
Yeah, test bed creation, integration testing.
Build pipelines are part of that. I mean, that's all SIG release.
Yeah.
But
yes, that's all SIG release, but I just wanted to make sure that it's also considered as part of the scope and capacity.
Yeah, let me share this. So I was just putting down, yeah, absolutely. That's, and then there's, what else did we say? We can do it right now. Like we said, well, there's the sort of high level CRD. By high level, I mean like the controlling topology as opposed to the low level like Multis, right?
In my view, John, the CFDs are at every level, to be honest, if I'm honest. Of course, we need to have a framework in place at the moment to make it end-to-end, but of course, the CRD definition eventually will have to be owned by each of the domains, as I was suggesting, in my view.
So there are pieces. Yes, there's like that's kind of what I'm trying to say, like the topology level, CRDs, modeling, and associated.
The reason why I'm saying this is the following, and that was my comment to Tal. If you only do workload cluster multis, probably unless you know what you're going to get from the high. So basically the whole flow matters. So it has an impact, not just I can do multis management, but you need to get information from here and there to be able to do so. So in other words, the whole stack matters. And that's why I'm saying you can do so, but okay, you have to fit into the whole framework somehow and work that out completely.
Sure, you know, the task forces are not separate from the whole the whole SIG, right? I agree, but
no.
Look,
so that's a challenge that I'm seeing, because what is going to happen is that you're going to define work for other groups that probably are focused on a completely different thing, and that's where I'm afraid that we are setting ourselves up for.
I think we can. There could be a way to do it with minimal disruption to the rest.
I don't know.
Look, we do have a general problem that, you know, all of R1 is very GitOps focused. It is.
Yes, but I think
right?
we had that conversation, Tal. So we made the decision to say R1 is GitOps focused. So let's stick with that. And I'm sure I know that you are not so happy with it, but we cannot continue revamping that conversation. And you can work if you want to do so, but we as a group, we should have a common goal.
I jump in and ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
The topology level CRD and the cluster specific CRD and function specific CRD, to me, is a correct interpretation? You have a CRD at the topology, you add more details, it become cluster specific. You know, it's a layer thing. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So like what I'm trying to capture here, and maybe not successfully in my terminology, is like we have this NF topology, or what we call 5G core topology in the workshop. That's kind of like, here's the general, you know, this function goes here, this function goes here, this function goes here. Then there's the how you take those, the output of that, and you create, you know, individual cluster specific instances that then get customized, which I don't even have on here yet, right? Is the post hydration is how things get customized. Well, I guess that's kind of part of cluster specific CRDs and modeling. So it's not necessarily good yet, the division. I'm just trying to write it down roughly. But then there's there's another dimension of the type of function, right? SMF, UPF, AMF, like that's a separate dimension. I don't know if we want to structure the groups that way or not. Like,
no, because one across 3 companies now, you know, Cisco, VMware, and Cray, we look at CRDs as maps, right? Roadmap, so to speak, where the intent is expressed at a high level and then hands off to the lower level controller sequentially until actual deployment into an edge cluster. And some people call it choreography. Is that where we're going? Am I misreading this? Is that a correct thing?
I mean, that's kind of the overall idea, right? Is that
you
start, but remember, like if you start with, when you say you start with a high level intent, what you're saying is you start with a partial picture. What that means is that the rest of the picture has to come from somewhere else.
Yes.
So somebody has to have programmed into the system, oh, this is details about every individual cluster, or this is details about my environment, or this is details about my infrastructure. So the person over here specifying it doesn't have to know all of that. Somebody else knows about the infrastructure, and they can just sort of refer to it by name. So like that successive refinement process is then a process of gathering all that information from all those different places into something that finally needs to be delivered.
And
But-
then translating that into implementation code level is really workflow between controllers at some point, using CRD as payload between controllers or
Yeah.
some sort of payload reference.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left, less than 5 minutes. Well,
Hey,
I wanna, yeah,
John, one question. What is the difference for you between cluster specific and function specific CRD?
I don't know. I put it down because but I don't know. I don't know if there is a difference. This is what I'm saying. I don't know if that's an appropriate way to slice it.
Because for me, this goes into the hydration domain, as far as I understand, right?
Yes, so maybe we put a, we put a, so.
Yeah, but I put it like that. Yeah, it's definitely a separate. You have to. At the moment, so at this stage,
Mark?
we have 2 controllers and 2 functions at the moment, right? In the proof of concept. I don't know whether it stays like that, but there is definitely separate work in that thing. But I would form a group or a subgroup on the complete on that whole space, if you see what I'm
Right.
saying. And
Right,
then,
so-
of course, there will be specific people that will implement the functions and other people focusing on the controller potentially. But
I mean, you
that
could
was my
say,
idea at some point.
you could do
Because
something like,
there's a
create-
very high dependency between them.
might do something like this. Host. I just like this is one way to kind of divide it. I don't know. What I would ask is that there's probably many opinions on this call. So go ahead and go into this document and add comments. I think that just gonna have to pick something and we'll find out it's wrong and we'll adjust. But let's try and get the best approximation we can to start so that you know we have less change. But this is, I think, getting into some of those, and it's you know.
One more question.
Sure.
I'm drawing from my past experience. I'm not, bragging about where I work and all that. I'm just trying to draw commonality from across multiple companies and projects. But at some point, we have to set up the infrastructure, right? The network, back to the Multus thing, before we can deploy, bring up a workload, right? It has to be there. That just the sequence of code. Is that so? There's like first you get the chips or the CPU, and then you load the OS, and then you load the networking, then you load Kubernetes, then you can start talking about workload. I've seen this pattern across VMware, across Cray, across Marvell even. So is that what Tao is talking about when he's talking about NAD, as in bringing up network?
It's a little bit above that. Like the infrastructure layer is the cluster layer. I mean, there's integration between them, and maybe I can let Tal talk. But like cluster provisioning and all of that is something we said is out of scope because we're presuming that's already been done, whether it's been done by hand or whether there's some magical R2 that does it for us, or whether we make it in a stretch goal and do it. It's a stretch goal. So we assume the cluster's there. What that means is that there's a workload cluster that's got Multus running with some CNI, with some whatever it needs, but then you need somehow to control that. And so the question is, does the control of that have to percolate? There's potentially runtime, like which interface, physical interface it's going to go through. We may not know that at management cluster time because it may be something depending on the class and whatever, right? And so there's a relationship between what you do in the management cluster side, how you specify and how specific you have to be versus when that gets resolved. And so in the workshop, we were able to do the NADs in the management cluster by having data, configuration data about the cluster and the nodes in the cluster as part of the cluster context. But that may not be realistic in all worlds. And so we want to kind of offer the ability to do it in either place. That's the idea of showing different capabilities that can be applied in different situations.
So
Yeah, because-
maybe I'll try to answer as to what I mean. I don't mean endpoint management as we're doing so far, right? That Wim is suggesting that we add to the CRDs, and I'm very hesitant about agreeing with that. But I'm talking about something that I guess John would call more low level. I mean, think about SRIOV, right? Writing those CNI configs for NADs is work that I will insist has to happen on the workload cluster, not at the level of GitOps, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So something very, very localized. I'm not talking about redesigning everything, but if right now our ket package includes NADs, I'm saying instead of that, it should include something a little bit more abstract so that the workload cluster could fill in and create those CNI configs as necessary.
Yeah,
So
I happen to agree.
I would say, if I may, I would prefer we don't say instead of. I would prefer we say as an additional possibility. Right? I don't want, we're building a platform here that was going to be deployed in, hopefully, if we're successful, thousands of different instances that we cannot possibly predict all of those environments. And so I don't want to constrain those capabilities.
No, I'm not saying instead of that Nefia would do this instead of. I'm saying as an example, doing it in a different way. Yes.
No, if I may chime in, coming from a former Marvell perspective, there are DPU, data processing units out there, accelerator cards that can support SRIOV. Did I finish?
No, sorry, and I just want to say
You
that
really want to cut me off?
No, I didn't want to cut you off. I just want to give the time to SIG meeting.
No, just let her finish, and then people can go to the next call.
Yeah,
let Anne finish.
Go ahead, Anne. I just want to give the time to go ahead.
Okay. There are DPUs that have specific capability that require SRIOV configuration, right? So, and those are confined to a specific cluster. Not everybody will have DPUs in their server nodes. So I see where Tao is coming from, but I see it as complementary, not opposing. That's all. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're out of time. There's another meeting happening now, which I'm not going to be able to make, but thank you all. If you can go into the document and put comments in your opinion, we'll try and come up with something and discuss it more tomorrow on what these little groups will look like. And then we can try to talk about who might get involved in each one. Thanks so much.
Thank you.